Hey everyone! Before we dive into today's powerful message, if this content speaks to your heart, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your support helps us reach more people with messages of hope and faith. Now, let's get started. The weight of silence. Have you ever felt like you were shouting into the void? You pray, you plead, you ask God for answers, for direction, for just a simple sign that He's listening, and you're met with nothing but silence. It's one of the most difficult experiences in the Christian walk. The silence of God can feel heavier than any burden we carry. It can make us question everything we thought we knew about faith, about prayer, about God's love for us. But what if I told you that God's silence isn't absence? What if the very moments when you feel most alone are actually the times when God is speaking the loudest, just not in the way you expected? This isn't about empty religious platitudes or telling you to just have faith when you're genuinely hurting. This is about understanding a profound spiritual truth that can transform how you experience those silent seasons in your life. When God stays silent, He's not ignoring you. He's speaking through the situation itself. Parentheses. Let's be honest about something right from the start. God's silence is uncomfortable. It goes against everything we've been taught about having a relationship with God. Relationships involve communication, right? They involve back and forth conversation, dialogue, exchange. So when we pour our hearts out to God and hear nothing back, it feels like a one-sided relationship, like we're talking to someone who's stopped listening. Parentheses. But God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts, and His communication doesn't always come in audible words or burning bush moments. Sometimes His most powerful messages are delivered through circumstances, through the very situations we're asking Him to change. Think about it this way. When a master teacher wants their students to truly learn something, they don't always give them the answers directly. Sometimes the best teachers step back and let their students work through the problem. It's not because they don't care about their students' success. It's because they know that the struggle, the process, the journey of figuring it out, that's where the real learning happens. God operates the same way, but on an infinitely more profound level. Biblical examples of God's strategic silence. The Bible is full of examples where God's silence preceded His greatest revelations and breakthroughs. Let's look at a few of these stories because they'll help us understand what God might be doing in our own silent seasons. Joseph's journey. Consider Joseph, the boy with the colorful coat who dreamed big dreams that God had given him. God showed Joseph visions of his future greatness, visions where even his family would bow down to him. But after those dreams, after those divine revelations, what happened? Silence. Not just for days or weeks, but for years. Joseph was thrown into a pit by his own brothers. He was sold into slavery. He was falsely accused and thrown into prison. For 13 long years, Joseph went from the pit to Potiphar's house to prison. 13 years of silence from the God who had given him those dreams. Can you imagine what Joseph must have thought? God, you showed me a destiny. Where are you now? Why aren't you speaking? Why aren't you rescuing me? But here's the thing. God wasn't silent at all. He was speaking through every single situation Joseph encountered. In the pit, Joseph learned that his brother's betrayal couldn't destroy God's plan for his life. In Potiphar's house, he learned administration and how to manage affairs in a foreign land. In prison, he learned patience, humility, and he gained connections that would eventually lead him to Pharaoh's palace. Every circumstance was a classroom. Every hardship was a lesson. Every moment of God's apparent silence was actually God shouting, "I'm preparing you for what I promised you." When Joseph finally stood before Pharaoh and was elevated to second in command of all Egypt, he could look back and see that God had been speaking all along, through the situation. Job's test. Then there's Job, a man who lost everything in what seemed like a cosmic instant. His children, his wealth, his health, all gone. And his friends, his own wife. Everyone told him to either curse God or confess some secret sin. But Job knew he hadn't done anything to deserve this catastrophe. Job cried out to God. He demanded answers. He wanted to know why. And for 37 chapters of the book of Job, God says nothing. 37 chapters of human reasoning, of questioning, of pain, of confusion. 37 chapters of silence. But when God finally spoke, he didn't answer Job's why questions. Instead, he revealed his sovereignty, his power, his wisdom that transcends human understanding. And Job realized something profound. God's silence had been teaching him something that words never could. It taught him that faith isn't about getting answers. It's about trusting the one who holds all the answers. The situation itself was the message. The test was the teaching. The silence was the sermon. If you're finding value in this message, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who might be going through a season of silence right now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button so you don't miss future content that could transform your perspective on faith. Mary and Martha. When silence seems like indifference. One of the most powerful examples of God's strategic silence comes from the story of Mary and Martha when their brother Lazarus fell ill. These were Jesus' friends. The Bible tells us that Jesus loved them. So when Lazarus got sick, the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." That's not just information. That's a plea. That's a desperate call for help. And what did Jesus do? He stayed where he was for 2 more days. He didn't rush to heal his friend. He didn't send a message back. He just stayed silent and still. By the time Jesus arrived in Bethany, Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. Martha met Jesus on the road, and her first words were filled with pain. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Can you hear the hurt in those words? Can you hear the confusion? "Jesus, we called you. We needed you. Where were you?" But Jesus had a bigger plan. He didn't come to heal Lazarus. He came to resurrect him. He didn't come to prevent death. He came to demonstrate his power over death. If Jesus had come immediately and healed Lazarus, it would have been a miracle. But by waiting, by staying silent, by letting the situation progress to its worst possible outcome, Jesus set the stage for a greater revelation of his glory. "Lazarus, come forth," Jesus called, and a dead man walked out of his tomb. God's silence allowed the situation to become impossible, so that when God moved, there would be no doubt about who deserved the glory. The silence set up the miracle. What God is really doing in the silence. So what is God actually doing when he seems silent in your life? What's happening in those moments when you feel abandoned? When your prayers seem to bounce off the ceiling? When heaven feels like brass? He's building your faith. First, God is building genuine, unshakable faith in you. Faith that doesn't need constant confirmation. Faith that can stand in the dark. Faith that doesn't depend on feelings or signs or immediate answers. It's easy to believe when you see miracles every day. It's easy to trust when every prayer is answered the moment you pray it. But that's not faith. That's sight. Real faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Real faith is developed in the silence, in the waiting, in the not knowing. God knows that the faith you build in the silence will carry you through anything life throws at you. When you learn to trust God, even when you can't hear Him, you become unshakable. He's preparing you for what you asked for. Second, God is preparing you for what you've been asking Him for. Remember Joseph? If God had elevated him to leadership immediately after those dreams, Joseph wouldn't have been ready. He needed character development. He needed to learn forgiveness. He needed to understand suffering so he could lead with compassion. Sometimes we ask God for things we're not yet ready to receive. We pray for promotion, but haven't developed the character to handle it. We pray for a spouse, but haven't become the person we need to be for a healthy relationship. We pray for ministry opportunities, but haven't learned to serve in small things. The silence is the preparation. The situation is the training ground. God isn't withholding what you asked for. He's getting you ready for it. He's removing what needs to go. Third, God's silence often accompanies a season of removal. Before God fills your hands with new things, He sometimes needs to empty them of what you're clutching. Before He can take you to a new level, He needs to remove dependencies, false securities, and things you've been trusting instead of Him. This is painful. It feels like loss. It feels like God is taking things away. But He's not taking. He's clearing space. He's removing the good so He can give you the best. He's silent about your current situation because He's orchestrating your future destination. He's teaching you to discern His voice in new ways. Fourth, God is teaching you to hear Him in ways you never have before. When you're used to God speaking a certain way, you can become dependent on that method of communication. Maybe you're used to getting goosebumps during worship, or having certain feelings during prayer, or hearing Him through other people. But what happens when those methods become unavailable? What happens when you're in a situation where you can't rely on your usual ways of hearing God? You have to learn new ways to discern His voice. You have to develop spiritual sensitivity. You have to learn to see His hand in circumstances, to recognize His signature in situations, to feel His presence in the storm. The silence forces you to grow your spiritual senses. It develops in you a deeper, more mature way of relating to God. Quick reminder, if this teaching is resonating with you, please take a second to hit the like button. It helps YouTube show this message to more people who need it. And make sure you're subscribed to our channel so you never miss content that could change your perspective on faith and life. How to navigate God's silence. So how do you actually walk through these silent seasons? How do you keep your faith intact when heaven seems closed? Here are some practical principles to help you navigate when God stays silent. Don't assume silence means absence. First, and most importantly, don't confuse silence with absence. Just because you can't hear God doesn't mean He's not there. Just because you can't feel Him doesn't mean He's left you. God promised, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." That promise doesn't have an expiration date. It doesn't have conditions. It's absolute. God is present in the silence. In fact, sometimes He's closer in the silence than He was in the noise. The silence is Him drawing near in a different way, an intimate way that transcends words. Look for God in the situation itself. Second, Start looking for God in the situation you're in, rather than waiting for Him to speak about it. What is this circumstance teaching you? What strengths are being developed in you? What character qualities are being refined? When you change your perspective from "God, get me out of this," to "God, what are you showing me in this?" everything shifts. The situation becomes your teacher. The problem becomes your classroom. The trial becomes your training. Revisit what God has already said. Third, go back to what God has already told you. Before the silence, what did God say? What promises has He made? What direction has He given? Sometimes we get so focused on what God isn't saying that we forget what He already said. The Bible is full of God's spoken word, His promises, His character, His track record. When God is silent about your specific situation, immerse yourself in what He's already said about who He is and how He operates. Let His written word sustain you when you're not hearing His spoken word. Trust the process. Fourth, trust the process even when you can't see the purpose. This requires a level of surrender that doesn't come naturally to us. We want to understand everything. We want to know the why behind the waiting. But God isn't obligated to explain Himself to us. He's obligated to be faithful to us, and He always is. When you can't trace God's hand, trust His heart. When you can't see His plan, trust His character. When you can't understand His timing, trust His wisdom. Keep doing what you know to do. Fifth, don't stop doing what you know is right just because you're not getting confirmation from God. Keep praying, keep worshiping, keep serving. Keep being obedient to what you already know God has called you to do. Sometimes we stop moving forward because we're waiting for specific direction. But God often reveals the next step only after we've taken the current step. Keep walking in obedience to what you already know, and trust that God will redirect you if you're going the wrong way. The silence is temporary, but the lessons are eternal. Here's something crucial to understand. The silence is always temporary, but the lessons you learn in it are eternal. God will speak again. The breakthrough will come. The answer will arrive. But the person you become while waiting in the silence, that person stays with you forever. The character that's forged in the fire of God's silence is the character that will sustain you through every season of your life. The faith that survives the silence is the faith that can survive anything. The trust you develop when you can't hear God is the trust that becomes the foundation of your entire spiritual life. God isn't withholding communication to torture you. He's deepening your capacity to know Him in ways that transcend words. He's building something in you that can only be built in the silence. When the silence breaks, and when God does speak again, and He will, you'll understand why the silence was necessary. You'll look back and see His fingerprints all over the situation. You'll recognize His voice in circumstances you thought were random. You'll realize that He was speaking all along, just in a language you were learning to understand. The breakthrough that comes after the silence is always bigger than what you could have imagined. The Joseph who went into the pit came out as the prime minister of Egypt. The Job who lost everything received twice as much as he had before. The Lazarus who died came back to life as a testimony to Jesus' power over death. Your situation isn't over. Your story isn't finished. The silence isn't the end. It's the plot development that makes the victory so much sweeter when it comes. A word for you today. If you're in a season of silence right now, if you've been praying and pleading and getting nothing but quiet in return, I want you to know something. God hears you. He sees you. He hasn't forgotten you. He hasn't abandoned you. He's not punishing you. He's speaking to you through the very situation you're in. He's building something in you that can only be built in the silence. He's preparing you for something so much bigger than what you're currently asking for. He's developing faith in you that will become your greatest asset for the rest of your life. Don't waste the silence. Embrace it. Learn from it. Let it transform you. Let it deepen your trust. Let it refine your character. Let it expand your capacity to know God in ways you never have before. The silence isn't empty. It's full of God's presence, God's purpose, and God's plan for your life. When God stays silent, He's speaking through the situation, and the message He's delivering is worth the wait. Your faith journey continues. Remember, you're not walking this journey alone. Every person of faith has experienced seasons of divine silence. Every giant of the faith has questioned, wondered, and waited. You're in good company, and more importantly, you're in God's hands, even when you can't feel them holding you. The situation you're in right now, it's not random. It's not punishment. It's not God's absence. It's God's presence in a form you're still learning to recognize. And when you look back on this season one day, you'll be able to say with confidence, God was speaking all along. I just needed to learn His language. Before you go, I want to ask you one more time. If this message encouraged you, strengthened your faith, or gave you a new perspective on what you're going through, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel so you can continue growing in your faith journey with content that challenges and inspires you. And most importantly, hold on to God in the silence. Your breakthrough is coming, and it will be worth the wait. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video.